Hi guys, Happy New Year. If there is such a thing with the pandemic. Um, Waiting on our speaker because I don't see him enter the room yet. Any thing to report? I don't really have anything. Looks like, don't quote me yet, but we're not going to have our SABR meeting in person on the 6th because it's too risky. And we might not even do a virtual one. We might just piggyback off of the museum's one, their annual birthday bash that probably will be happening that same week. Other than that, I don't have any, it's lockout. We're all stuck inside. I'm sick, not COVID, but my immune system is terrible, as you guys know. So
Is it? I'm sorry. Is it locked down over where you guys are at?
Just a mask mandate, but a lot of individual offices are saying stay home.
Okay.
So who knows what's going to happen the next 4 to 6 weeks. It's predicted that I guess mid-month is going to be the hugest number jump post Christmas holidays. So glad to see so many people. Glad
Hello, Peter, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dan, you can take over, do your thing.
Well, wait, I've got to figure out, get my camera on. Let's see. Come on.
There should be an option that says start video.
Yeah, I have start video.
Just click on that.
Oh, wait. Okay, wait. I think
upper right corner of the box.
Yeah. Wait, hold on. This stuff never works the first time for me.
Of course.
Hold on.
That's 2022 for us.
And 2020 and 2021.
Just keep fingers crossed for August.
I'm not counting on that.
I know.
Thanks full screen. Please bear with me, everyone, while I try to get my camera.
You have a captive audience, Dan.
Yeah. That's just not working.
Can you hear me? My name's Ed Penfield.
Yes, Ed, how are you?
Okay, good. It's the first time I've been at the meeting.
Okay. Are you a SABR member?
Oh,
No, I haven't. It's the first time I've been reading the book on Pete Reiser. I'm about halfway.
Oh, got it. Cool. All right, Dan, we see you.
all right, excellent.
All right, well, I'll let you take it from here. I'm going to cough a lot, so unless anybody has any questions for me, I'm going to mute for a while.
Okay.
You can use the chat.
But everybody can see me and hear me.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, Peter, do you want me to wait a minute or wait because we have more coming?
I think we're probably at max, but a couple of people might. This is being recorded, so I will send it out obviously when it's done.
Okay.
So you go as you please. You're the guest.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you very much for coming to the Zoom tonight for this talk on my new book, Baseball's Greatest What If: The Story and Tragedy of the Brooklyn Dodgers Pistol Pete Reiser. I'm going to assume everyone here at least has a vague idea of who Pete Reiser was. Like the book says, he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He played for the Dodgers from 1940 to 48, and then played with a few teams after that. He's primarily famous for being one of the greatest raw talents baseball ever saw, and it could have been one of its greatest superstars, but he had the unfortunate habit of running into outfield walls. And I found his story fascinating. That's why I chose to write a book about him. I wondered how a guy who had so much promise and who got us to such a great start, it wasn't just promise. In his first season with the Dodgers, 1941, Pete led the National League in batting, and he led it in, let's see, runs, doubles, triples, slugging percentage, OPS, putouts, assists, and hit by pitch. He was really a dominating player, and he really led the Dodgers to their first pennant that year, their first pennant in over 20 years. And then the following season, 1942, he was doing even better. He was hitting 360. His batting average was higher than Ted Williams, higher than Stan Musial, higher than any player in the major leagues. And he wasn't just a singles hitter. Again, he was leading in doubles and runs and slugging percentage. And he was starting to steal home. He stole home twice in 42, and he was leading the league in stolen bases. But July 19th, 1942, in St. Louis, he hit the road on what I was trying to say, first step to his demise, you might say. 12th inning, the Dodgers and Cardinals were playing in St. Louis, and the score was tied 1-1. Enos Slaughter of the Cardinals hit a fly ball to deep center field. Reiser, he was known for chasing the ball no matter what. And he did that on this occasion and slammed right into the center field wall, which was made of concrete, no padding whatsoever. He sustained a bad concussion on the play. He didn't catch the ball, but he kind of staggered off the wall, and he was able to throw it in to Pee Wee Reese, and they almost caught Slaughter. Slaughter got an inside the park home run and won the game for the Cardinals. But Reiser, even though he was like half out, still managed to almost make the play. He was taken to the hospital after that, and a doctor advised him, you need to spend a few days in the hospital, you need to rest, you need to let your brain heal, you have a concussion. But Pete, he was known for his win at all costs style of play, and he didn't want to stop playing. He thought the Dodgers depended on him, and then really they did. The team around him, it was good, but it wasn't a great team without him. So he came back just 6 days later. And for the rest of the season, he was battling headaches and double vision and dizziness. And sometimes he would sit down for a day or two at a time. But he wanted to play, and Leo DeRocher, who was the Dodgers manager, he kept Pete in there. He thought Pete was the guy who would take them to the World Series. And his batting average shrunk by about 50 points, and the Dodgers wound up losing the pennant. And this kind of set the pattern for the rest of Pete's career. He could not stay off the field no matter what kind of injury he sustained. He played with a broken ankle. He played with a separated shoulder. He played with multiple concussions. He played with a pulled hamstring. He played with, you name it, he tried to play through it. And by the time he was 30, he was pretty much done. He was a wreck. Grantland Rice, the great sports writer, said he was always a star, but he had injuries that would have wrecked the battleship. And he wasn't really exaggerating. So let me go back to the beginning of Pete's life, because the book here, I didn't examine, there have been lots of articles on Pete Reiser's career. The most famous being a piece by the writer W.C. Hines called The Rocky Road of Pistol Pete. And that's been in all sorts of great anthologies of great magazine, great sports articles. But the articles about his career didn't really get at the heart of what made Pete Reiser tick and what made him a great player to begin with. So I did a lot of research, and I went back to his childhood. Reiser was born in St. Louis on St. Patrick's Day, 1919. He grew up in a baseball-mad family, in a baseball-mad town. His dad, George Reiser, had actually played in the low minor leagues around 1908. He played for a couple of Class D teams, I guess we would now call low Class A. He didn't last very long, but he was a pitcher. He got blasted. 2 teams released him, and that was pretty much the end of his career. But he had a great love for baseball. And from the time Pete was born, he was putting a baseball in his hand. And he did this. Pete was one of 12 kids, and George Reiser did this with his other kids too. But Pete was the most talented of the bunch. He was not only following the footsteps of his father, he was following the footsteps of his older brother, Mike Reiser. Mike was 5 years older, and he began playing on the sandlots of St. Louis a few years before Pete. And he apparently was a very good player. And Pete started kind of tagging along, as you know, as a younger brother will do to an older brother. Pete began playing with kids who were 5 years older. And he had to play up to stay with the kids, but he could do it. He was a great natural athlete. And he always said that Mike Reiser would have been in the major leagues. He said Mike Reiser was an even better player than he was. He said Mike actually signed with the Yankees when he was 17 years old. I researched this. I couldn't find evidence that this was true, but I did find many St. Louis area box scores from like the late 20s, 1930, that showed a kid named Reiser playing. So that probably was Pete Reiser's older brother. Mike, however, died of scarlet fever in January of 1931. And Pete always said that, you know, that he got his intense desire to play, you know, in part because he was trying to impress his older brother and maybe trying to live up to, you know, the image of what his older brother would have been. So Pete, he was consumed with baseball. He dropped out of high school in 10th grade, just wanted to play ball. Signed with the Cardinals. He was too young to start playing ball, so he began accompanying the team's chief scout, Charlie Barrett, around the country. He spent the summer of 1936 just going from minor league park to minor league park as Barrett checked out all the scouts, checked out all the players. And sometimes Pete would suit up and play with these kids. You know, he was 16 and these kids were like 18, 19, but he would play and the manager would say, hey, leave this 16-year-old with me. You know, we could really use him, but Barrett said, no, he's too young. So finally, Pete, 1937, he starts playing in the Cardinals minor league system. Cardinals minor league system was a sight to behold at this time. They had, I think at that time, they had about 25 minor league teams. They had over 500 players under contract, and it was still growing. Eventually, it would grow to about 31 teams and about 700 players. But that's not another story. That does relate to our story. First, Pete played 1 year in the Cardinal system, and then the commissioner of baseball, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, he declared that the Cardinal system had used, illegal means to sign and control minor league players. He specifically said in some leagues, they were controlling 2 or more teams. So he released 90 free agents, among them Pete Reiser. And Pete didn't want this. Pete wanted to play for the Cardinals, but he wasn't allowed to. He wasn't allowed to re-sign with them for 3 years. So the Cardinals made an arrangement with the Dodgers. The chief Cardinal scout talked to the chief Dodger scout, Grant, and they said, they told Pete sign with the Dodgers and you'll be fine. What they didn't tell Pete was that they made a secret agreement, a gentleman's agreement is what they called it. And the agreement was that after 3 years, the Cardinals would repurchase Reiser from the Dodgers. So Pete goes into the Dodger minor league system, and in 1939, he goes to spring training with the Dodgers. He had kind of convinced Leo DeRocher to take him. Spring 1939, spring training, Pete gets on base the first 11 times he's up. The New York press goes gaga. He had 8 hits and 3 walks, and 3 of the hits were home runs. So the Dodgers keep him throughout spring training, and DeRocher wants him on the major league team. The Dodger GM, Larry McPhail, he says, no, he's too young. But really what McPhail is thinking is we can't put him in the majors because he is still secretly the property of the Cardinals. So Pete does go down to the minor leagues in 1939. 1940, still in the minor leagues, he's hitting .378. And finally, the press is calling for him to be called up to the majors. And finally, McPhail says to Branch Rickey, who was the Cardinals GM, we can't trade him back to you. He's getting too much attention. So the Cardinals and the Dodgers arrange a trade. The Dodgers purchased Joe Medwick, who's a Hall of Fame outfielder. He had just won the Triple Crown a few years earlier, and they paid an exorbitant amount of money for Medwick. It was reported at the time it might be as high as $250,000, gigantic money for 1940. It actually wasn't that high, but it was $132,000, which I'm sure would be like $2 million today. And they gave that to the Cardinals for Joe Medwick, but secretly, some of that money wasn't for Medwick. Some of that was compensating the Cardinals for the loss of Reiser. About a month after they purchased Medwick, the Dodgers called up Reiser, and Reiser immediately got into the starting lineup, hit .293 the remainder of the 40 season. And then in 41, he has his amazing breakout year. Should have been the most valuable player. I encountered so many games during that season. I learned about so many games where he had the game-winning double, the triple, the home run in the late innings that broke the tie and allowed allowed the Dodgers to win the game. The voters elected Dolph Camilli instead as the MVP. Camilli had a very good season, but he wasn't as good as Reiser. So 41, the Dodgers go to the World Series. They lose to the Yankees on, they could have tied it in Game 4, but Mickey Owen dropped the third strike in the bottom of the ninth inning with 2 out, allowed the Yankees to come back. But this doesn't really diminish Pete's future. 42, he's off to that great start, and then has the accident. Now, one of the things I wanted to uncover in this book is what happened to Pete during the war years. I think anyone familiar with his story knows that he, like hundreds of other major league players, went into the service during the war. He was in the Army for 3 years. There are funny stories about that, though. He went to the barracks where they examined the players, gave them a physical exam before admitting them. And doctors initially said, no, you can't go in the Army. He had had concussions. He had had elbow surgery. He had had torn ligaments in his side and his leg. He had all sorts of injuries. And normally, the Army wouldn't take anyone like that. But this was World War II. And there was a strong sentiment around the country that players, the thought was, if you're healthy enough to play Major League Baseball, you're certainly healthy enough to serve your country. And he ran into an Army captain who, actually, I left out part of the story, excuse me. When he went to the barracks, he just gave him his real name, which was Harold Patrick Reiser. Pete was a nickname from childhood. And he, doctor said, you're not fit, you go home. And he was putting on his socks when this captain comes running out to the room, to the dressing room, and said, hey, aren't you Pete Reiser? You're not Harold Reiser, you're Pete Reiser. And the guy, and Pete said, well, yeah, I am Harold Reiser. That's my real name. And the guy said, nope, you're not getting by me. You're in. And he kept encountering obstacles that doctors repeatedly approved him to leave the Army during the war. And always an officer would say, no, we need you for the baseball team. And he said he could have been discharged 5 times, but he never got out. He never was sent abroad, though. He was deemed not fit enough for combat. And let me tell you something. He was at Fort Riley, which is a base in Kansas. And there was another ball player there. There were many other ball players there, but there was one in particular named Harry Walker, who was an outfielder for the Cardinals and then the Phillies, and later on managed the Pirates. Walker was sent to the same base as Pete, and he got meningitis at the base. And the way Walker told it, everyone else who got meningitis was sent home. But the officer said, no, you're a ball player. That'll be bad publicity if we let you go. So he too was caught in the same system. And then Walker was actually sent over to Europe and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't think he got wounded, but he shot German soldiers and was awarded a Bronze Star. So Pete was really kind of caught in a web he couldn't get out of during the war. he wound up playing exhibition ball for about 3 years in the Army, playing for soldiers. And what's funny is he could not turn off the intensity. Rex Barney, who was later a pitcher for the Dodgers after the war, he recalled an instance where Pete slid into third base, and he slid so hard, he tore the base off its moorings and it went flying 10 feet. That tells you how hard he was playing. And then in 1945, he was playing at Fort Lee, Virginia. He was chasing a fly ball. It might have been more like a foul ball, but he was chasing it. And he ran through a makeshift fence. Now, Army wartime ballparks weren't, concrete creations. They were they threw them up wherever. And there was just like a hedge there or some sort of just very flimsy fence. And Pete ran right through the fence. On the other side of the fence was a drainage ditch, somewhere, depending on the telling, somewhere between 10 and 25 feet deep. And Pete tumbled into the ditch. And he injured his right shoulder, which is his throwing shoulder. He actually wound up separating it. But he used a bit of caution. He sat out the rest of the Army season. But when he got back to the Dodgers the following spring, even though his shoulder was killing him, and even though the x-rays confirmed he had a separated shoulder, he wound up playing the entire 1946 season with that separated shoulder, among other injuries, because that was the attitude. He had to play, and the Dodgers felt they needed him in there, and DeRocher felt he needed him in there. And, so it was very heroic, but not the smartest thing he could have done. Anyway, I'd like to pause there. Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, I do. I was kind of curious whether when warning tracks came into play, was that a problem before?
Well, in the 40s, when Pete started out his career, I don't think any major league park had a warning track at that time. That idea, it might have been floating around, but nobody had implemented it. The outfield walls were kind of dangerous territory for all outfielders at that time. There was no warning track. None of the walls had any padding except for the ivy on the wall at Wrigley Field. And also some of the center fields had obstacles placed in them. I was talking about Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, where Pete hit the wall in 1942. He had to dodge a flagpole to try to catch Enos Slaughter's fly ball. So he dodged the flagpole, but then hit the wall at full speed. In Forbes Field, the Pirates had a huge batting cage, and they kept it stored way out in deep center field. At Yankee Stadium, where Pete played 2 World Series, they had monuments out there to Lou Gehrig and Miller Huggins at the time. Babe Ruth was added after he died. Crosley Field, the field sloped up, before it went to the wall. There were all sorts of hazards out there. So, Pete, the thing is, though, other outfielders learned to avoid the hazards and shy away from the walls. And Pete, he first hit the wall at Ebbets Field in 1941. I forgot to mention this, minor league game 1942 in Norfolk, Virginia. The Dodgers were losing 10-0 to the Yankees in the 6th inning, exhibition game. And Charlie Keller of the Yankees hit a fly ball to deep center, and Pete went right into the outfield wall. He just did not know any restraint. He actually slammed into Dixie Walker, who was the Dodgers' right fielder, like 3 or 4 times in the 1941 season. And then Walker actually said, I swear, I yell and he doesn't hear me. And so Walker developed a system where he just, put up his hand, waved his hand, and that he kind of got Pete's field of vision. And so Pete, after that, avoided hitting Walker, but he hit the ball. John Burbridge, you had a question?
Yeah, Dan, can you comment on the relationship of Pete Reiser with Leo DeRocher? Leo really kind of takes him under his wing, and later on in his career, Reiser ends up being a coach for DeRocher. Can you comment on that whole relationship?
Yeah. Reiser was DeRocher's kind of player. really, not only did he play hard, he wasn't afraid of anything on the field. And DeRocher, he was the kind of guy who was always starting when he was a player, shortstop for the Cardinals. He started fights, he yelled at guys, he taunted them. And Reiser didn't taunt guys the way that DeRocher did. He wasn't firing off insults, but he played so hard that, DeRocher really took a liking to him. Just the other day, I found this recording of Pete talking at the 1940 World's Fair in New York. And the announcer says, I asked DeRocher, who should I invite to speak today? And DeRocher said, hey, invite that kid, 21 years old, Pete Reiser, just joined the team. Really, he's a really great attitude. So DeRocher was taken with Pete from the start. And he actually, I found an article where DeRocher basically admired Pete for running into the walls. He liked it that Pete didn't get scared, didn't get shy of the walls after all the collisions, which, I guess elite athletes need to have that attitude that they're not going to be scared, but that's taking it too far. I think anyone could see that, that is very counterproductive over time. But yeah, and you're right, DeRocher did hire him as a coach years later with the Cubs. And Pete was there in '69 when the Cubs had their famous collapse in '69. Pete actually took over as manager on some days when DeRocher was either sick or when he had his famous time when he flew to the coop. He flew up to a summer camp for his wife. Something like that. Anyway, who else?
I have a question. It seems obvious to me, he could have been a great third baseman. He had a great arm. And he even said that, I think, in your book. Why didn't they put him at third base in 1940? They didn't have any great third basemen, Brooklyn. Why didn't they put him at third base? He loved to play third base.
When he came up in August, end of July of 1940, he kind of played a little bit all over the field at first. And then Cookie Lavagetto, who was the Dodgers third baseman, got appendicitis. And so he was out for like the last 6 weeks of the season. And Pete did play third base. But then in the spring of '41, Lavagetto was back. And Lavagetto was a good, not great, but a good third baseman. And the Dodgers needed a center fielder. Dixie Walker had played center field the previous year, and DeRocher thought he was too slow. So they put Pete in center field. And then after the war, DeRocher wanted to put Pete at third base again, but he had separated his shoulder. So he couldn't really make the throw across the infield very well. So they had to put him back in the outfield, and that's basically,
But there was a lot of but ifs. If he hadn't gotten out of the Army earlier, you know what I'm saying? They could have put him at third base because he didn't have shoulder problems. And that's another what if scenario.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
it is. And Pete did want to play third base. He actually said later in life, if I had played third base, I wouldn't have hit the walls. I could have played till I was 50. Excuse me. But he was so good in center field. I found plenty of articles, plenty of observers who said if he's not as good as Joe DiMaggio now, he will be soon. He was so good that first year and a half. But yeah, that's basically.
But he had reckless abandon. I mean, basically, you mentioned in the book, he never considered the walls when he went after a ball. He just kept going, oblivious to his surroundings. You know what I'm saying?
He really was, and he never learned, at least until it was too late in his career, he never really learned to pull back. Actually, even now that I think about it, even after he got traded from the Dodgers, he was playing for the Boston Braves, he still hit the wall for the Braves in 1949, but it just wasn't a horrible collision the way some of the ones that.
And they kept playing him in the outfield. They just kept playing him in the outfield because his arm was gone then later in life, then his arm was gone, or
not only that, his arm was gone, and he had chronic dizziness in the outfield. And actually from about mid 49 on, when he appeared, it was mainly as a pinch hitter or a pinch runner, or, I mean, they would sometimes put him in the outfield, but he just got to a point where he couldn't play the field
What about his left arm? What about his left arm? He could throw left-handed. Why didn't he ever resort to outfield using his left arm?
No, he always said he could throw with his left arm. And there were people who saw him do it. And apparently he could throw with a lot of oomph on the throw. The velocity was not the problem, but he didn't have accuracy with the left arm. So he always talked that up like he was ambidextrous. And he was a switch hitter. He was naturally a righty, but learned to bat lefty because he realized that put him a step closer to first base, and then he could use his great speed to get infield hits. But he couldn't really throw lefty, not at a level where he could. And also, he would have had to put his glove on the other hand. He would have had to make. I think it just would have been too hard.
They couldn't put him at first base either. At first base, he couldn't have played.
Before I continue.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So we get to 1946, and the Dodgers are fighting for a pennant. They're fighting the Cardinals. Really nip-tuck race. And Pete's playing with a separated shoulder. And one of the things I uncovered about in the book was that he really resented the fact the Dodgers weren't allowing him or even encouraging him to get the surgery. DeRocher wanted him in there. Branch Rickey, who was the Dodgers general manager by this point, didn't trust the doctors to successfully perform surgery. He thought Pete was doing okay as he was, so he should keep playing. And Pete started to complain to the press. And actually, let me take a little tangent here. His whole attitude after the war had changed. Before the war, he was gung-ho, young guy, ready to go out and become a superstar. After the war, he had money problems. 3 years in the service at earning $50 per month, it really taken a toll on his finances. And the Dodgers basically weren't paying him any more than they had paid him before the war. In fact, Branch Rickey told him before the 1946 season, "We'll give you $9,000. No, we'll give you $10,000 if you can show you're healthy. We'll give you $9,000 if you're not healthy." And that $9,000, even then, it was a good salary for the average American worker, but it wasn't a great salary for a baseball player. And it would have been a 10% cut for Pete. So he kind of carried that grudge. And then early in the 46 season, there was the Mexican League, a rival league in Mexico that was trying to sign American players, bring them down there to play. And some players did jump, including two from the Dodgers, Mickey Owen, the catcher, infamous for the 41 drop strike, and Luis Olmo, who was a outfielder originally from Puerto Rico. The Mexican League agents offered Pete $100,000 in a 3-year contract to jump. And Pete actually considered this offer because it would have been an enormous increase, and he felt he had to at least consider it. Branch Rickey jumped on a plane from New York to St. Louis, got there, and they had a private meeting. And Rickey said to Pete, "Are you, is my throat already cut? Or you have the knife in my back?" Very dramatic. But Pete said, no, I'm going to stay with the Dodgers. And Branch Rickey did give him a raise, but it was only $2,500. He was earning $12,500. And another thing that made Pete a little bit bitter was that he was off in groups with players like Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams and Stan Musial. He was often compared to Musial in particular. A lot of people thought had he been healthy, he would have been every bit as good, if not better than Musial. But those guys by that point were making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, and Pete was stuck making $12,000. So he was really, he started to really resent the Dodgers in many ways. But he stayed in, he kept playing. In May of 46, he hit the wall, re-injured his shoulder. In August of 46, he hit the wall again, got a bad concussion. And one of the funny things was that every time he hit the wall, they'd take him to the clubhouse and they'd let him rest. He'd wake up, and the first thing he would do was ask for a cigarette. And they would give it to him. This was 1940s medical procedure. Give the guy a cigarette, calm him down, maybe. And he would go to the hospital again, and they would look at him, and he would, in August of 46, he got a bad concussion. That time, he only stayed 24 hours in the hospital. He refused to rest, and he was back in the lineup a couple days later. End of the 46 season, he was playing with a pulled hamstring. He was on first base. DeRocher gave him the steal sign. Now, this was the year Pete had stolen home 7 times in one season, and he was leading the National League in steals overall. But he was playing with a pulled hamstring. Nevertheless, he took a lead off first base. The Phillies pitcher did a pickoff move to throw to first. Pete slid back into first and broke his ankle. He always said he was trying to favor the left leg because this was the right one. He pulled the hamstring, broke his ankle. So 1947, he comes back, and you will often hear that the concussions are sort of like the major factor in his downfall, and they were a big factor. But actually, the ankle robbed him of a lot of his speed. Every time he tried to steal home for the rest of his career, he was thrown out. And he was caught thereafter. He was often caught trying to run from first base to third or second to home. He had lost a step. He was still fast, but he lost a step. 47, he was playing okay. He was a little bit erratic. Early June, the Dodgers are playing the Pirates at Ebbets Field. A player hit the ball to center field, and you can imagine what happened next. Pete charged into the wall, and this time he didn't just give himself a concussion. He gave himself a big V-shaped cut on his head, on his forehead. Started bleeding everywhere. The players or the Dodger staff took him into the clubhouse, and the situation at first appeared to be so bad that a priest was called. He was Catholic, and he was given the last rites in the Ebbets Field clubhouse. Now, it turned out to be not quite that bad. He did wake up and was given a cigarette, and then was taken to a hospital in Brooklyn. And this time, he listened. This time, he stayed in the hospital for 5 days. He sometimes exaggerated in later years. He would say, "Oh, I was in the hospital for 10 days and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed." That wasn't true. A lot. I'll get to that later. A lot of the things he said about his own career weren't actually true, but he really did. The story about the last rites is true, and he was out for more than a month. The Dodgers finally told him to go rest. Actually, let me back up here. He was sent to Johns Hopkins, actually in Baltimore. I think the Dodgers had a relationship with the hospital because more than once Pete was sent to Johns Hopkins, and there, that's where the doctor said you can't just jump back in the line if you need to go rest. And the interesting thing about this incident in Dodger history was that from the time Pete went down, a new guy emerged as the spark plug of the Dodger offense, and that was Jackie Robinson, who had just joined the Dodgers that spring, first black player, obviously. And he had gotten off to kind of a slow start in terms of batting. But as soon as Pete went down, the Dodgers, I don't know if anyone told Robinson to do this, but Robinson began to play with greater daring on the bases. He began getting more hits, began stealing more, began doing his famous moves to rattle the pitchers. And the Dodgers began to move on from Pete in many ways. The 47 team went on to win the pennant. Pete did come back in July, and he actually hit his first 50 games back. He actually hit about 360. He was hitting very well, but he wasn't running as fast. And there were games where he would just have to come out because he was too dizzy in center field. He couldn't focus his eyes very well on fly balls anymore. And he was still playing too hard. There was a game in July where he dove for a ball in center field and he dislocated his left shoulder. The right was the one he had separated. This one he dislocated. And the Dodger trainer ran out to center field and popped it back into place right there in center field. Pete stayed in the game. Later that season, he was running to first base and he collided with the Cubs first baseman. He took a knee to the groin. He was down for 5 minutes, but he stayed in the game. So Dodgers get to the World Series, and game 2, he was playing center field in Yankee Stadium, and this game really showed that Pete was just not capable of playing at a major league level in the outfield anymore. He let several balls get by him. He just lost a couple in the sun. The following day, he tried to steal second, and he broke his ankle. The year before, I think he had broken the right ankle. This year, let's see, in 40, I think he must have broken the left one this time. But he got to the hospital and he told the doctor, don't tell anyone that I broke it. It was like a hairline fracture. Don't tell anyone that I broke it. Just tape it up real tightly, because he didn't want Branch Rickey to give him a contract the following year that said, you know, we'll give you X amount if you're healthy and we'll give you a lower amount if you're not. So he's back on the bench in game 4 of the series. And this was the famous game where the Yankees, Bill Bevins was pitching a no-hitter into the 9th inning. And let's see, Bevins walked the guy. Dodgers were losing 2-1. And Bevins walked the guy. And then Al Gianfrido stole second base. So the Dodgers now have a runner on second base, 1 out, 9th inning. And Bert Schotten, who had taken over for DeRocher as manager that year, sent Reiser up to bat with a broken ankle. Schotten apparently didn't know that Reiser's, but he knew at least Pete had a badly sprained ankle. He sent him up there anyway because he thought Pete can still, you know, he can still swing the bat. And the Yankees respected Reiser so much that they walked him intentionally. They put the winning run on first base. Reiser limped down to first base. If you ever seen the film, he was limping down to first base. It's fast, but he was limping. And they took him out, put in a pinch runner, Eddie Miskus. Next batter, Cookie Lavagetto hits a double off the right field wall, 2-run score, and the Dodgers win the game and break up the new. So that was Pete's contribution to that famous day in baseball history. And actually, the next game, Schotten sent him up to pinch it again. And again, the Yankees intentionally walked him. They were so scared of Reiser. They were putting winning runs on base. Hold on, I'm just going to take a little drink of water. Actually, this is a good point to pause for any other questions. Anyone, please fire away.
I just want to make one comment. I think, you know, there was the movie, The Natural, but I think this based on reality, they could like get Steven Spielberg. Spielberg got a hold of this with computer animation. They could recreate the ball fields, the old ballparks.
I can't, and for some reason, I can't hear you.
Oh, hold on a second. Now, can you hear me?
And we can hear you okay.
Somebody tell them what I said.
Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I can hear.
Just let me know in the chat, please, if you can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Fortunately, I can't hear you.
Can you tell him what I said about Spielberg making this into a picture like The Natural, based on computer animation with the
I
ballparks?
can't hear anything. Hold on, I'm going to turn my speaker on and off. See if that fixes.
Any better? Can you
I
hear us
can hear
now?
you. Where'd he go?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear everybody. I hear everybody.
Now we don't hear you.
This is weird. Speaker microphone's on. Test mic. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I don't see him now. I don't see the moderator. I mean, the speaker. Is he on?
His
Is he off?
mouth is moving, but I can't hear him.
I don't see him.
No, he's there.
Yeah, his picture's there, but I can't hear what he's saying.
Yeah, I
For
can
a while,
hear
he
him.
couldn't hear us,
I mean, I
and now
can
we
hear
can't
you
hear him
guys.
either.
Can't hear him.
I see everybody. I don't see him, the narrator here.
Oh, now he just appeared. Where did
There he
there he
is.
is.
Okay, I see him
Still
now.
there.
I see Dan now. Okay. Dan, can you
Can't
hear
hear
us? Can you hear us? Dan?
Now
We
he can
can't
hear
hear
us,
you.
but we can't
Dan,
hear him.
Mike, can you hear my question about making this into a movie like The Natural, based on reality, with computer animation of the ballpark, Spielberg, something like that? Is that possible? I mean, it would make an incredible story, a movie, you know?
Dan, how are you at sign language or shadow puppets? We still can't hear you.
Oh, boy. What's going on here? Oh, what's going on here? Let me take a look at volume here.
No, it's not your volume.
Can you hear me?
Dan, it looks like you're muted. No, you're not.
Oh, Dan's muted?
Not
Yeah,
anymore.
he
was
was, but
briefly.
he's not now, but we still can't hear him.
Would it be worth hanging up and
Yes,
try calling in
I
again?
don't, he keeps disappearing off the screen, Dan. I don't.
I think he just moves positions as somebody else joins the positions of the boxes and
Can you
change.
hear me now?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Can you
yes,
hear me?
Yeah, now we,
yes.
Okay, good. Can you see me too?
yeah,
No.
I can.
I don't see you. I don't see Dan there. I don't see him.
Can anyone hear me?
I see you
Yes, we
now.
can.
I
Yes.
see you now. Okay.
Okay, are we
Yeah.
good?
Looks like
Can you
you're
hear me
back.
now? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Did you hear my question about making this a movie?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
That would be fun if we could.
Is it, I mean, would it, do you know Steven Spielberg, maybe?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not.
I think this would be incredible if they made this into a movie.
You know, actually, you ever seen the Natural with Robert? Redford?
Yes. This is real, though. This is not the,
Well, no, but
this is real.
Bernard Malamud, who wrote the novel, The Natural,
Yeah.
he was inspired by various Dodgers, and it's my strong belief, although Malamud never confirmed this when he was alive, but he had to, there's a scene in that movie where a character named Bump Bailey runs right into the wall, of course, and dies. That had to have been inspired by Pete Reiser. I can't imagine, anyone else. And actually, Pete Reiser's son-in-law is making a documentary about his life. I don't think there's any film of Reiser hitting the wall in any ballpark, but I can pass along the idea of computer animation.
Are there any videos of Reiser, by the way? I mean, in it playing?
Not much. There's video basically from the 2 World Series that he played in, and a little bit from, I think, the All-Star games that he played in. And beyond that, none that I know of. Now, his family, they apparently had a lot of home movies that he took. So there might be some video in that batch of stuff, but I haven't seen it. But mostly,
I tried to search the internet. I couldn't find very little.
Yeah, the best I know, if you look at the 1947 World Series film, there's some great footage of Reiser taking off from home to first, and you can see even at that stage of his career, still very fast going down the line. He actually he evaded a tag from the Yankee first baseman, and they actually freeze the frame so you can see Reiser go around the guy.
Wow.
Anyway, so were there other questions while we had our little technical snafu?
Because I was wondering, I know you referred earlier to the fact that a great athlete like Reiser might just never be able to turn off his competitiveness. But did anybody, a manager or anybody else during his entire career, give him some like tough love and say, look, you've got to change your style?
Yeah,
No.
that was the question I was going to ask. Is in the off season, I mean, was somebody like paying close attention to what he was doing? Or, in terms of I'm sure he was rehabbing or whatever they called it back in 1941 during the off season. Was anybody paying that much attention? Because clearly he was a special player. It seems to me like the Dodgers would have had somebody peak.
Well,
Gotta
Richard,
dial it back.
what would happen during the off season would be teams wouldn't even bother checking with their players. So the Dodgers had no way of tracking his progress at all.
Well, I can tell you that after the 46 season, Pete did finally convince the Dodgers to let him have the surgery that fixed his separated shoulder. So that injury was healed more or less, although he had problems with that shoulder later on. Beyond that, I don't think anybody ever told him, Pete, you got to take it down a notch. I didn't find any evidence of that. And in terms of rehab, basically they would tell him to go rest for a day or two and then get back in the lineup. One time they sent him down to, when Larry McPhail was the Dodger GM, McPhail owned a farm somewhere around Baltimore, somewhere in Maryland. I think he later owned a racetrack in Maryland, but they told him go down to the farm for like 4 days and rest there, because they did that because if Pete was around the ballpark at all, he would jump into batting practice and fielding practice, and he would try to talk DeRocher into letting him play. Yeah, really, the players had to care for themselves. They got very little care from the teams in those days. The teams were mainly interested in keeping them on the field, even if they were injured, even if they were beat up. You know, that was the attitude. And I guess even today, there's some of that attitude still in professional sports, but now they can take an MRI and diagnose it.
My grandfather was a huge Joe DiMaggio fan, but he used to see Reiser play in Brooklyn, and he swore that that was the only player he thought could have been as good or better than DiMaggio. And he said the only difference was that DiMaggio knew when to stop and Reiser didn't.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yeah.
Some people compared Pete Reiser to Pete Rose. Rose being a very aggressive ball player.
Mouthy.
But Ed, go ahead.
He's a little mouthy. Pete, Rose.
Yeah.
A little mouthy.
Yeah.
Braggart.
But
Pete wasn't like that.
No. Pete didn't play with his mouth. He wasn't trying to like get in people's heads the way DeRocher was. But the difference was Pete Reiser was more talented than Rose, no question about that. But also Rose, he would run into people, he would run into catchers, he would start fights with shortstops, but he never ran into a wall. He played aggressively, and Reiser played recklessly, and that was the main difference
That's where
between
you
them.
sum it up. Yeah.
Anyone else? All right, I'll go on.
Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah.
Can you go more into detail about his post-major league career, especially his time with the Dodgers, not only as a minor league manager, but also when he became a major league coach, working with Maury Wills? Because if I remember correctly, Maury Wills owed him a lot of his career on Reiser, teaching him how to steal bases, especially how what he did in 1960s. Can you please just go more into detail about that, please?
Sure. I was about to talk about sort of the end of his career anyway, and then his coaching years. Pete. So I just want to start at 1948. Pete was still with the Dodgers, but he was so beat up by this point, he simply could not get through even a week of playing without getting some kind of pull or injury. And he actually went home for about 3 or 4 weeks in the middle of the season because he hadn't broken the ankle again. He had bone chips in his ankle. So they were trying to make that heal. And the Dodgers started to get upset because he wasn't playing. He was earning the magnificent salary. He was earning the magnificent salary of $19,000 by now, and they wanted him to play. But I lost my train of thought. So he was home in the middle of the season. Finally, he rejoined the team, but for the second half of the year, he was mostly just a pinch hitter and a pinch runner. he was so resentful at the Dodgers, and they were resentful at him. And finally, after the season, he was traded to the Boston Braves. He played 2 seasons for the Braves, increasingly less as the months went by. 51, he might have been out of baseball, but Branch Rickey was now running the Pirates. And Rickey was trying to build a team that, at least in part, would be immune to the draft from the Korean War. Pete, by this time, was 32. He had had enough injuries to wreck a battleship, as Grantland Rice said. And so he signed on with the Pirates. And he actually played pretty well for about half a year, mostly pinch hitting and pinch running. And then in August, he was just doing a little fielding practice before a game, and his shoulder popped out. I'm sorry, this shoulder popped out, the one that had been dislocated, and he was basically done for the season. So 52, he had played for a few months with the Indians. They released him. His career was done. 53 to 55, 53 and 54, he was out of baseball. He was trying to make a living selling used cars. He lost like most of his money. He was actually working in a wood mill. He was like a carpenter. 55, he called the Dodgers and said, please let me back in baseball. I need a job. So they sent him down to Class D in Thomasville, Georgia, where he was as the manager. And he spent the next 5 years managing in the minors, and he was actually quite good at it. He was a good coach. He was one of those players. For all his raw talents, he wasn't one of those guys like Mickey Mantle who just sort of went up and did it and couldn't explain what he did. He was good at explaining how to hit, how to run, and the players that he was coaching in the minors began to rise up to the major leagues. Frank Howard being the most famous, Tommy Davis being another one. And after 5 years in the minors, actually his last year in the minors, 59, he was named minor league manager of the year because he managed his team in Texas to a pennant. 1960, the Dodgers call him up to the big club. They actually, Pee Wee Reese had been a coach in 59, didn't want to coach anymore, so they called up Pete. Pete became the hitting coach and the third base coach. And one of the things he did was coach Maury Wills into being an all-star. Wills had played 8 years in the minors, joined the Dodgers in 59, but was struggling in 1960, and he went to Pete for help. And Pete basically rebuilt him from top to bottom, gave him a new bat, new batting stance, threw batting practice to him for about 2 weeks. And Wills became, for the first time, a bona fide major league hitter. And then he went to work on Maury's base stealing and coached him on how to read the pitchers and when to run, when not to run. And Wills in 1960 led the league in steals. And then of course, 2 years later, he stole 104 bases and was named National League MVP. And Maury Wills in his autobiography credits Pete at considerable length, not just a passing mention, at considerable length, with showing him how to be a major leaguer and how to stand out, how to be a star. So Pete was a Dodger coach for 5 years. And then the Dodgers replaced the entire coaching staff at the end of the 64 season because they hadn't had a good year. And also Leo DeRocher, by this point, he was sort of the bench coach of the Dodgers. He was helping Walter Alston, and there was like a power struggle of some kind. And the Dodgers, basically, they had to get rid of DeRocher, and Reiser was a DeRocher guy, always called himself a DeRocher guy. So if DeRocher's gone, Pete was gone too. But in 66, when DeRocher was hired to manage the Cubs, he immediately hired Reiser as the hitting coach again, and sometimes the third base coach. And Pete built up some of their players too. Don Kessinger, who was the shortstop, Glenn Beckert, who was the second baseman. He really helped them become better hitters. And it's funny, in 69, the Cubs got off to a fantastic start, and everyone thought this is the year they're going to make it to the World Series. But one of the things I uncovered in writing this book was Pete was nervous as early as June that this was not, everything appeared He saw the Cubs had weaknesses, and he was worried the whole team would fall apart in the end, and that's what happened. In part because DeRocher, the same policy DeRocher had applied to Pete as a player, stay. I don't care if you're injured. I don't care if you're tired. You keep playing. He applied that to the whole Cubs team, and the Cubs collapsed in the September of '69. And then Pete, for whatever reason, I think he left the Cubs at the end of that season. He might have just gotten sort of disgusted with the whole situation. Excuse me for a second. So Pete went on to coach for several more years. He went to the Angels, then back to the Cubs. And then he kind of became a scout for the last few years of his life. He had enough traveling. He lived in Southern California by this point and would just kind of scout games in that area for teams. He was in declining health, though. He had been a lifelong smoker, so he battled emphysema, and he still had headaches, and his shoulders hurt. He was just in a lot of pain. And 1981, during the World Series, he passed away, age 62. But what's funny is, Pete was never forgotten. I ran into so many people since this book came out. I've heard from so many people who said either they remembered Pete or they heard about Pete from their dads or their granddads, and people raving about him to this day. Only a week or two ago, there was a poll on Twitter. Somebody asked who's the greatest what if player in history. A lot of people mentioned Pete, which is remarkable given that it's been 80 years since he won his only batting title. He won a place in baseball history, both for his achievements on the field and for his role in teams making the outfield walls safer. He really was the reason that teams began padding the walls and installing warning tracks and also removed all the objects from the outfield. So that's kind of that's him. That's Pete. That's his book. And I see somebody. Wait, I just want to get to a couple remarks here. Larry McPhail owned a farm in Bel Air and a racetrack in Bowie. Okay, Bowie. Excuse me. That makes sense. Not sure. Somebody said I wouldn't claim Kessinger and Beckert as showcases for a hitting coach, but he turned them at least into 280, 290 hitters, which in the pitching dominated 1960s wasn't so bad. And Beckert, I think, did hit 342 one year also. Anyway, so more questions, any comments, questions, anything?
Why didn't he become a manager?
Well, he did manage in the minor leagues.
But in the majors?
I think I talked to his daughter about that. And apparently his wife, on one hand, both Pete and his wife were of sort of mixed minds on that. He thought he could manage in the majors and maybe deserved the chance to manage in the majors. But at the same time, he still had physical troubles and didn't really want the figurative headaches of managing a big league club when he still had literal headaches among
More headaches.
other
In
problems.
addition to the bad headaches.
Yeah. More. Anyone?
Very informative, Dan.
Thank you.
This was really good. Hopefully
Excellent.
you will be here in August, if there is an August.
I'll try. I was planning to a couple of years ago, the 1 in 20. While I'm at it, I just got to get my other book, which was about Lou Gehrig, Last Ride of the Iron Horse, and that's about his battle against ALS and his battle to stay in the lineup, especially in 1938 as he battled ALS. But I think did I talk to this group? I think
You did last year
20,
sometime. Yep.
about that. Yeah. So please, pick up both books, both good reading, good for long winter nights.
And for those of us in the mid-Atlantic, we're supposed to get more snow Thursday into
In
Friday.
Florida, thank God.
Hey, Dan, got a question for you about Reiser. In your research, off the top of your head, how many injuries did he sustain? I mean, do you ever keep track of that?
The sports writers of the time said he was carried off the field 11 times. Now, I actually did try to track this. he might have left the field 11 times because of injuries. I did not find 11 times when he was carried off in a stretcher, but the book does contain a handy dandy chart with all his major collisions with outfield walls.
Wow.
And he had at least five confirmed concussions. There may have been more that just weren't diagnosed at the time. And let's see, I think he had major injuries to both shoulders. He broke both ankles. So it could very well add up to 11 significant injuries during his career.
Did you hear any recordings of his voice at all with your research? Recordings of his voice?
A little bit. There's well, like I mentioned earlier, there's one from the World's Fair where he actually doesn't speak all that much. I found he was on a radio show in 1941. I found that. His family gave me a recording from the end of his life in 1981 where his son-in-law was talking to him and interviewed him. He actually had kind of even when he was 21 years old, he had a very low voice. And then toward the end of his life, it was a very frayed smoker's type of voice. He wasn't meant to be a broadcaster. Let's put it that way. He wasn't like
he wasn't very talkative. I seem to gather he didn't talk much. I mean, his very simple spoken person.
Yeah, he tended to give short answers, I think, to a lot of
vocal, not very vocal.
But although, it's funny, when he talked, he did tend to exaggerate some of his own, not so much his feats, but his injuries. They were already bad as they were. I don't know why he needed to, but he claimed he would get, when he hit the wall, he got skull fractures. Oh. And I did look into this closely, and I didn't find any evidence of a skull fracture in any of the collisions, but he got, like I said, at least 5 concussions. He said he was paralyzed. He was never paralyzed. What were some of the others? I don't know. That magazine article I mentioned, Rocky Road of Pistol Pete, that contains a bunch of exaggerations. But I don't know why. I mean, his story is very dramatic and fascinating as is, in my opinion.
I believe you said that he ran into Harry Walker 3 or 4 times.
Dixie
Walker, yes.
Yeah.
I was wondering, did he ever injure another player? I don't think any of us would have wanted to play infield or outfield him out there. But did he ever injure another player running into him?
No, I didn't find an incident of that. Although the one time he was just standing in the outfield during batting practice, and a Dodger pitcher, Clyde King, ran into him. King was chasing a fly ball during pregame practice and ran into Pete and knocked him down. And Pete had to be helped off the field because it had worsened a recent concussion. So, but no, I don't think he ran into Dixie Walker 3 times. He ran into a guy named Tommy Tatum once. He almost ran into Pee Wee Reese, but no injury from it.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty close with Pee Wee, right?
Yeah. Early in his career, in 41, they were really best buds. They were roommates on the road and roommates at an apartment building in Brooklyn. And in the spring of 42, they served as each other's best man at their weddings, which took place only 1 day apart in Florida. And then I think after the war, I think they never stopped being friends, but I think they just sort of naturally drifted apart a little bit.
Hey, Dan, he briefly coached with the Angels before coming back to the Cubs again.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly, he had a previous relationship with Lefty Phillips, was the manager at that time. Could you talk about a little bit about his experience with the Angels, especially working with Alex Johnson?
I don't know too much about it, except I know he was a coach in 70 and 71. And Alex Johnson did win the batting title, I think, in 1970 with the Angels. I don't know if Pete had a role in that, though. From what I know about Alex Johnson, who had definitely kind of an attitude problem, I mean, I can't imagine he would have gotten along well with Pete, but maybe Pete was like the one guy who could motivate him. I just don't know too much about that.
Was he in a lot of old timer games? I mean, after he retired, was he in old timers where they honored baseball players?
He was in some of them. In LA, he was in a Dodger old timer game in 1980. I know that. I'm not sure he played much by that point. Maybe earlier in his career, he played some old timers games. Actually, I do know when he was managing in the minors, he would still take batting practice with his team. And from some quotes I found, he was still kind of harboring a dream where the Dodgers would call him up in September or something like that, you know, as a pinch hitter. But he was just too out of shape and too beaten up by that point.
Yeah. They don't make them like that anymore.
They didn't make it like it then. Pete, he was really kind of one of a kind in many ways. He was I think most players learned restraint at one point or another. They might have learned it the hard way, but it's hard to think of other players who charged repeatedly into walls. The only other one I can think of was an outfielder for the Philadelphia Athletics named Elmer Vallow, who also had a similar problem. Just he would knock himself out chasing fly balls. I can't think of any player today who plays like that. Any player in the last 50 years who plays like that. But if I'm wrong, someone please tell me.
They get paid too much to play like that now.
Yeah. I mean, when you're paying for 10,000 or, you know, it's different than playing for 10 million.
Well, you wrote an excellent book. I'm halfway through it. It reads like a novel. It really does.
Thank you.
It's hard to believe. I mean, it's just well organized. It flows brilliantly. There's nothing boring about it. It's an excellent book. You really did a great job on that.
I'm glad to hear that.
I hope it does well. Is it doing well, I hope?
Yeah, it actually is. It's doing even maybe a little better than I thought. There are a lot of old Brooklyn fans out there and a lot of
So it's doing better in New York.
Yeah, no, I think it is selling in New York. And a lot of people who heard about Reiser, either from their dads or granddads, and you know, and there's still a lot of interest in him.
It's remarkable.
Someone said Bryce Harper. Harper was a guy, you know, in 2013, he slammed into the wall at Dodger Stadium and didn't knock himself out, but gave himself a really nasty gash on his neck. And Vin Scully, who was calling the game, he immediately mentioned Pete Reiser. You know, Pete is still the standard 80 years later of the guy who runs into the wall and, you know, kills himself trying to win.
Jimmy Pearsall was an interesting player too. Jimmy Pearsall for Cleveland, remember? Jimmy Pearsall, a little erratic personality.
I've heard of him. Did he actually run into walls?
No, but he had a great potential, but he had mental problems, a lot of mental problems, Jimmy Pearsall in Cleveland. And that really hurt his career because he had great potential. And the other way, it affected him rather than running into walls, his personality, his mental state.
Well, of course, the Indians outfielder who mirrored Reiser was Grady Sizemore, who ruined his career from running into walls. I have a two-part question. Hopefully, the first hasn't been mentioned. I arrived here late, so excuse if this is wrong. It was already been brought up. Did Reiser ever run into walls in the minor leagues?
I'm sorry, I can't hear again.
He's asking if Reiser ever ran into walls in the minor leagues.
Hold on, I got to fix my speaker, I think, again.
Okay. You put up the question. Can you see it on the screen?
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're good.
Okay, good. Go ahead and ask your question again about him running into walls in the minor leagues.
Yeah, did Reiser ever run into walls or or fences in the minor leagues?
Um,
In the Army.
in the Army, he did. In exhibition, spring training games, he did. I don't think I found an example of him doing it in the minor leagues. No, none that I know of.
He didn't have any vices?
I'm sorry?
Did he have any vices?
Vices?
You know, like you mentioned, there was a lot of rumors about drinking, but he really didn't have any drinking problems or anything like that.
Running the walls with advice.
Branch Rickey accused him of having a drinking problem, but I found no evidence that that was really true. And he smoked, but I mean, I think
It was just for contract negotiations to lower his salary that he came out with that
it could have
story.
been. It could have been. I don't want to give away there's a section in the book. I don't want to give it away.
Oh,
But yeah, Ricky accused him of drinking. I don't think it actually was true. And other than smoking, I don't think he had any vices. And I guess the average American males, everybody smoked in, 1956. Yeah.
that was a big thing in the 40s.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I have a question. His last name is spelled the same as mine, except for the first two letters. I've always had a problem with people pronouncing my name like it's I instead of E. Did Reiser have the same problem? A lot of people pronounce his name Pete Reiser.
Yes, that happened constantly. Actually, I mentioned earlier, I found a recording from the World's Fair in 1940 where Pete was like a speaker, a guest. And the announcer keeps saying Reiser. Pete, here's the great young player for the Dodgers, Pete Reiser. And Pete didn't actually correct him at the time. But later on, both he and his dad, when they were speaking to the press, they made a point of saying it's Reiser, it's not Reiser. But there was a Captain America movie about 10 years ago where in the last scene, Captain America, Steve Rogers, is listening to a Dodger game or a recreation of a Dodger game in 1941, and they used a real game. They used the action from a real game. It wasn't really Red Barber at the mic, but they recreated this Dodger game in which Pete hits a grand slam homer inside the park, but the guy in the movie kept saying Reiser. And, I listened to that and I think, oh, somebody should have, caught that. But, I guess if you look at the spelling, it looks like Reiser. It's a German name. A lot of people just look at it and say Reiser.
Does his family still live in the St. Louis area, or they moved around the country now?
His daughter and son-in-law and their kids, I think, all live in Southern California.
Oh, really?
There might be some cousins in St. Louis, but I don't honestly know.
So he has grandchildren, I guess. He has grandchildren.
He had a grandson who actually played in the 1994 Little League World Series.
Really?
Yeah, but apparently never tried to go for like a full-fledged baseball career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he was good. He was good.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great.
If he said he grew up in St. Louis, did he ever run into Yogi Berra or Joe Garagiola in his youth?
Not when he was a young kid, but during the war, when he was at Fort Riley, which is in Kansas, I think his second year there, the commanders loved having a big time baseball team. And so they would grab any player from the majors or minors they could. And Joe Garagiola got drafted and sent to Fort Riley. And so Pete and Garagiola wound up playing on the 44, I think they were called the Fort Riley Centaurs. And like the team went 18-1 or something like that. So Pete and Garagiola knew each other fairly well, and they hung out a little bit together after the war. So now in Yogi Berra, I have seen pictures of Pete playing an exhibition game somewhere in Missouri after the war, and like it's funny, it's a little like minor league exhibition game, but in the starting lineup they had Pete Reiser, Yogi Berra, Joe Garagiola. Who were the other guys? There was one other major league guy, and I can't think of the name, but it was like this all-star team. So they all did know each other, but not when Pete was actually a few years older than Bera. So not when he was little, but soon thereafter they met. Anyone else?
Interesting.
Are we done, Pete?
Looking good, Dan. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you
We had
very
a-
much.
We had a very nice crowd. We had close to 25 today. So,
Oh, good.
and I'll send the link around for you guys who don't know where SABR puts all of the chapter talks
Okay.
in an email in the near future. So that way you can, going back to 2020, I guess, when Zoom became the thing, and you can find different talks for different chapters. And we seem to have a lot. We've done more than a lot of other chapters. So appreciate this is Dan's second time around because he did the Lou Gehrig book, I think last year, or I don't even know, it was 2020.
I think it was like October of 2020, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we obviously we appreciate it. Our next talk is the Called Shot Lunch, which will be 2 weeks from today at noon. And a gentleman who lives out in Kentucky. I forget the name of his book. His name is Kelly Park, and about the Sandlot. Yeah. I have it somewhere buried.
Yeah, the book, Peter, is just like me.
Yeah.
Kelly is a good friend of mine, so it's about players like Lou Piniella and Jim Cott in their experiences on the Sandlot. Our chapter just had Jim Cott on recently, and it was because of Kelly's book. So tune in 2 weeks from today if you can. So thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else,
I just wanted to apologize for my audio problems. I have done 4 or 5 of these talks now, and every single time my audio seems to go out somewhere in the middle. So I'm gonna get that fixed. I just wanted to.
Thank you.
all right, guys. Well, appreciate it. Happy New Year. Hopefully it will be happy eventually. And I'll see you on the in 2 weeks, which I guess is the 19th. And look for an email and stuff. If anybody has any presentations they'd like to do, obviously we're going to have to be doing more Zoom stuff through March, it looks like. Just email me and let me know. Right now we're booked through the first weekend of February, but after that we're open.
Is the annual SABR meeting still going on?
The chapter meeting, no. You will get an email probably late, tomorrow's Thursday, probably by Friday.
Tom
And-
might be referring to the convention, is that correct?
Yeah.
No, the SABR Day
annual
meeting,
SABR
and
Day meeting.
yeah,
Peabody thing.
yeah, we were
Not the
gonna,
one- not the one in July. Hopefully we're still okay for that one. For August.
it's August 17th, so keep your fingers crossed. So, all right, guys, well, much
All right, bye
appreciated.
now.
All right.
Have a good night, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you,
thanks a lot.
everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Thank
Happy
you.
New
Thank you,
Year.
Dan.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.